what we're ultimately driving at is figuring out the standard deviation and the average. And this slide just shows you the example of that data analysis or analysis tool pack that comes with Excel. It's free, so you may as well use it. And the specific thing we're going to look at is descriptive statistics. So we're going to go into some sample data now and run that on that sample data and then use it as part of a stratification to then score the data and see, which ones are more likely larger, let's say, for our scoring analysis. I wanted to get back to a specific item, which is taking a look at unusually valued items, not so much from a digit pattern or number pattern or whiz rule pattern, but really just is it large and unusually large in relation to the entire data set? So, we talked about possibly weekend journal entries, yet large weekend journal entries may be much more rare, and this graph showing this, than ones that are much smaller, where 10% of the time you could have items that are on a weekend that are less than $100, but only 2% of the time you may have items that are over $10 million. So, you want to focus on those larger size points. Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about is calculating a standard deviation. And while I've already set that up in my Excel, what you can do in order to set that up in Excel 2007 or 2010 is just go to your Start menu, which is this button here. And by clicking on the Start menu button of Excel, you can then go down to the Excel Options button down below. Once you get there, you can click on Add-ins and select the Analysis Tool Pack. Now, what that will do is that'll provide you a variety of descriptive statistical analysis and many other statistical analysis that goes beyond anything that I would do. But I find that the descriptive statistics, which we're going to talk about, is a very, very useful tool, and we're going to show you how to do that in the sample data now. Now in Excel, we can go to our sample data and take a look, let's say, at this invoice amount field. And we can highlight all of the data within that invoice amount field for our analysis. And in this case, you don't want to select, by the way, that first row, because that has a header info. So we want to select from, in this case, I2. I can hit my Shift and then the arrow down button, and that brings me down to the bottom, and that gets all of my data listed. Then select Data, Data Analysis, and Descriptive Statistics comes up. I mean, you have all of these other stats programming that you could use. I find random number generator regression can be useful, but we're just going with the basics here, Descriptive Statistics, and we hit OK. It has the input range. We have the new worksheet that we're going to go to with this, and we're going to create the summary stats. So you can decide to play around with these options, but I'm just going to keep it simple and make sure that that summary stats is selected, hit OK, and we get our results. Now, what I did was I cleaned up those results over here, so let's just use this schedule here. Taking a look at what was produced, there's a lot of stats here. I mean, you have a range, you have mean. I'm going to focus in on the mean and the standard deviation. So let's just do a couple of formulas here. We're going to say that first one, which is 827, is the mean. If I want to add one standard deviation to that, we can say standard deviation. If I hit my F4 key, that will lock that position. And then I can add the 827, which is above here, to that. Now, if I copy that formula down one, that will actually add the standard deviation again. So just to check what I did, I can double click on that formula and it adds those together. And then what I can do is kind of follow that. I guess in this case I'll have to do this again. So we'll do equal the 827, and now I'm going to minus that, the standard deviation, and hit my F4 key to lock that in, and I'm going to copy that once more. So now we have the mean, 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviation. Let's throw a third in there on each side, 3 standard deviations. So 3 standard deviations, we'll talk about some of the stats here. Anything above 2 standard deviations is weird. Anything above 3 standard deviations is very weird from a value point of view. So if I have any invoices that are above 19,861, that's clearly weird. Anything obviously above the 13 is also weird. But this gives you an idea of how we can calculate the mean as well as the standard deviation for this entire population, which can then now be related back to the payables data for our analysis. So let's jump back over to the payables data, and I'm just going to scroll over to the right here to some of this work that I've done. I've brought over some of the standard deviation numbers and work that we've done, and I've also added some other limits into this information. Now we can do a stratification. And I ended up getting this idea from Charlie Walker with Topcats, who's an Excel add-in, but this concept really just uses the VLOOKUP concept. And this is a function within Excel. And let's just take a look at this function and just kind of look at the arguments here. So what I've done is we took the descriptive statistics that we had before, and we put to that some titles. So minus 2 standard deviations to 1 standard deviation is this negative 11,862, etc. And the one thing that I wanted to note is this $1 million one, and the $1 million one, excuse me one sec, is actually kind of the lowest limit that you want to set in your stratification. So it'd be almost like a minimum within that file. And what's really nice, even though I set it at 1 million, you can get that minimum from the descriptive statistics that we calculated. So that was something that you can put in that minimum. What that'll do is, and now let's talk about VLOOKUP in relation to this table, and I keep kind of goofing up here by selecting items. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up this value here, 265799, and I'm going to look in this table array, Q6 to R11, and in that table array I'm going to write the column 2, which is over here, and instead of putting false, I'm going to put true. Normally you put false here if you want to get an exact match, but if you want to get a close match, the way that Excel will do this is it'll actually go up to this item here. So if I have an amount, let me take a simple one here, say from 827 to 7172. Let me just close that. 827 to 7172, which is where 2657 lands. What the VLOOKUP table will do is it'll go through this lookup table, which again is sorted in order, and I believe you need to have this sorted in order for this to work. And it'll go to that first number that it finds, and then it'll kind of write in that number until it reaches that next mark. And if it's over 7172, it will continue. And when it's over 13517, it'll actually write over 2 standard deviations. Now the reason we put the negative million in there is really just to be some limit below. Otherwise, if I don't have this in here, and I'll delete that just for a second here. When I go to my VLOOKUP stratification, if I filter that, just from a filter point of view, you're going to notice, I believe, some NAs coming in. And let's take a look at those NAs. So by looking at the NAs, what you can figure out is that they are far below, or I think it was $11,000 or so. So let me just get rid of that filter. Bear with me one second, and go back in. And so because it was below that 11,862 credit, it didn't know what to write. It didn't have that limit to work from, so it just puts an NA. And so what you want to do is put 1 million in there, and that'll clean it up for you. So this type of stratification, the reason I did it with the standard deviation is because we want to see what items are below 2 standard deviations and above 2 standard deviations, which you can do very simply. I mean, you can filter just like we did before, going to the data menu and selecting filter, and just selecting the items below. Excuse me, actually I want to clear all of this, and then just select these 2 below and over, and then that will give you the 59 out of 4,821 items that
are below the 2 standard deviations or above it. And, as you see, they're all quite large items in relation to the average. And the average, again, was that $827. And again, very statistical way of quickly isolating who the larger ones are, but also, just to really say, hey, we're using math to calculate it. Just as one last thought is I created a pivot table that you'll have in here. It's pretty easy to do. You just kind of put that VLOOKUP stratification as the rows, and I did a count. And I did that really just to kind of say, how do my percentages rack up to what we saw in Wikipedia? And Wikipedia at least tells me it's for 1 standard deviation, 68%, then 95.6. And now that you actually look at this data, when you start adding up actually the average to 1 standard deviation and 1 standard deviation to 2 standard deviation, you start to find that yes, like at least 95, even more than 95% is showing up there. And then that means that it is one of these more, I believe, narrow standard deviation bell curves that we're working with here, because it is something where there's a lot more, the numbers are closer to that average or closer to that mean that we're working from. So again, just wanted to show you that full circle and show you that in our data as well. And a way to then extract that. Another way to get to the details, did want to note this, is the below or above. You can just double click on the 8 there and it'll bring up those 8 items that you can take a look at as well. So that is another way of getting to the details, but all of these spreadsheets are in the Excel sample data that you will be receiving.